What happens when a flight attendant questions a quiet black man's right to wear a simple cross around his neck without realizing that man is Denzel Washington? The terminal buzzed with the usual rhythm of hurried footsteps and last-minute gate calls as Flight 288 prepared for departure. At Gate A-17, the boarding agent gave a polite nod as Denzel Washington approached. Dressed in a dark zip-up hoodie, jeans, and a worn Yankees cap pulled low over his brow, he barely drew attention, just the way he liked it. A simple cross necklace hung over his chest, resting gently against his shirt. It wasn't flashy, just a thin leather cord and a small silver charm, faded from time and touch. He reached up once to adjust it, the gesture unconscious but reverent. For Denzel, it wasn't about style. That necklace had traveled with him through roles, prayers, and heartbreak. It was a reminder of faith, family, and where he came from. When the gate opened, he quietly stepped into the first-class cabin, greeted by the cool aroma of citrus-scented disinfectant and the low hum of luxury. Most passengers were still boarding. Denzel slid into seat 2A without fanfare, placing a slim leather carry-on beneath the seat in front of him. He pulled out a book, one of Baldwin's, the spine well worn, and settled in, hoping for a quiet trip. He nodded politely at a few passengers as they trickled in. A couple recognized him, their eyes lighting up with surprise, but Denzel simply smiled, warm, brief, and humble. One woman mouthed, "I love your movies," and he gave her a grateful wink, then turned back to his reading. For a man used to red carpets and roaring crowds, anonymity was a rare gift. Today, he wanted peace. No cameras, no chaos, just sky, silence, and the comfort of the clouds. But that silence wouldn't last long, because while Denzel sought stillness at 30,000 feet, someone else on board had already decided he didn't belong, not because of his fame, but because of something much smaller, something hanging around his neck. And soon that quiet flight would become something much louder. Amanda adjusted her scarf in the galley mirror, smoothing a stray wisp of blonde hair back into her tight bun. She had been a flight attendant for over a decade, polished, professional, and proud of her role on high-profile flights. First-class passengers expected excellence, and Amanda prided herself on delivering it. She stepped into the cabin with a tray of drinks, her heels tapping rhythmically against the carpet. As she passed seat 2A, her eyes caught on a passenger she didn't immediately recognize. Tall, quiet, reading something literary. But it wasn't the book that gave her pause, it was the necklace. A simple beaded cord with a small cross, handmade looking, something a street vendor might sell. Amanda's eyes lingered longer than they should have. Her lips thinned slightly. He doesn't look like the first-class type, she thought, not with that necklace. She moved past him, offering drinks to the rest of the cabin, but her gaze kept drifting back. His clothes were clean but understated. No designer logos, no briefcase, no visible status symbols, just that necklace and an air of quiet self-possession. Amanda made a snap judgment, one she wouldn't voice aloud but let shape her behavior. Maybe he was someone who had used miles or gotten bumped up. Maybe he was trying to seem important. A quiet man wearing a statement like that. It felt performative. When she returned with a tray of water and champagne, her tone shifted. "Would you care for something to drink, sir?" she asked, polite but distant. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Denzel looked up, his expression kind. "Just water, thank you." Amanda handed it over, careful not to touch his fingers. As she walked away, she whispered to another attendant, "Trying a little too hard, don't you think?" The other attendant blinked, unsure how to respond. Amanda smirked and turned back toward the galley, her heels clicking a little harder now. What she didn't realize, what she refused to realize, was that the man in 2A wasn't trying to be anyone. He was someone, and soon her judgment was going to come back in ways she couldn't imagine. Because sometimes the smallest assumptions carry the biggest consequences. especially when you make them at 30,000 feet. The flight had reached cruising altitude. Clouds drifted peacefully outside the window, soft and unbothered. Inside, however, something more subtle was brewing. Amanda returned to the cabin with the first service cart, her demeanor all crisp smiles and artificial cheer. But when she reached seat 2A, that cheer thinned like air at high altitude. She didn't offer Denzel a hot towel like the others. No second glance. No welcome back, Mr. Washington, even though she had clearly overheard the murmured recognition from another attendant minutes earlier. Instead, she moved with mechanical precision, setting down his tray with a quiet clink, her eyes scanning him, not with curiosity, but calculation. The kind of look that weighs rather than welcomes. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked flatly. "Pasta, please." She handed over the tray, her hand hovering like his presence might stain her fingers. Her smile was brief, more of a formality than a feeling. Denzel nodded politely, unfolding his napkin with the same grace he brought to every room he entered. He had seen this before. Not the outright hostility that grabs headlines, but the quieter kind, the clipped tone, the averted eye, the service that always arrives just a little colder than everyone else's. He didn't react, but he didn't forget either. Across the aisle, a woman in her early 60s noticed. She wore a navy pantsuit and the kind of face that had seen boardrooms and boardwalks alike. Her brow furrowed slightly as she glanced at Amanda, then at Denzel. Something about it didn't sit right. A young man in 3B, headphones off now, watched as well. He'd been pretending to read, but his gaze had tracked every subtle moment. Denzel felt the shift in the air, not outrage, not yet, but curiosity, awareness. Still, he said nothing. He chewed quietly, nodded his thanks when Amanda refilled everyone's drinks, but skipped his row entirely, twice. He looked out the window. Above the clouds he could think clearly. Sometimes silence was power, but sometimes it was preparation. Because the flight might be smooth, but the tension was starting to descend. It started simply enough, a request, a polite one. Denzel pressed the call button just once. He waited, glancing around. A few passengers glanced his way, but quickly returned to their books and screens. Amanda appeared a minute later, her expression already tight. "Yes?" she asked, a little too sharply for first class. Denzel offered a warm smile. "Would it be possible to get a ginger ale when you have a moment?" Her eyes dropped to the necklace, then flicked back up to his face. Her lips twitched into a smile, tight, dismissive. "Well," she said, her voice loud enough for others nearby to hear, "first class comes with class. Some people forget that." The words hit the cabin like sudden turbulence. The young man in 3B's head snapped up. The woman in the pantsuit dropped her book to her lap. Denzel didn't move. He simply blinked once, slowly, like he was letting the words settle before choosing how to respond. He didn't. He nodded once, calm, grounded. The silence that followed was heavier than any reply could have been. Amanda, perhaps expecting a flustered response, shifted awkwardly, as if she'd meant it as a joke, but knew it hadn't landed. She turned without another word and walked away, heels sharp against the aisle. The older woman leaned slightly toward Denzel. "I don't know who taught her manners," she muttered under her breath, "but I think they missed a few chapters." Denzel let out a breath, quiet, controlled. He wasn't angry, not visibly, but he felt it in his chest, a familiar tightness. Not because of the insult, but because of the expectation. He had to decide, once again, how to carry the weight of someone else's ignorance with dignity. The cabin returned to a hush, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that comes before a storm, because everyone had seen it now. And whether Amanda knew it or not, she had just drawn a line. Not between first class and coach, but between right and wrong. And the man in 2A? He wasn't about to cross it. He was going to stand on it and let the truth speak for itself. The cabin had returned to a delicate calm, though it hummed with a different kind of energy now. Tension lingered like static in the air, felt, not spoken. Amanda moved briskly through the aisles, her face frozen in practiced professionalism. But her mind raced. In her head, she replayed the moment with the man in 2A. The necklace, the tone, that silent stare. She told herself he was just trying to make a scene, trying to act like he was somebody. From the galley, another attendant, a younger woman named Marcy, emerged carrying a new set of towels. She paused beside Amanda and nodded discreetly toward Denzel. "Hey," she whispered, "you know who that is, right?" Amanda barely glanced up. "No clue," she muttered, brushing lint from her sleeve. "Some influencer, maybe? They'll let anyone buy a first-class upgrade these days." Marcy blinked, surprised. "That's Denzel Washington." Amanda finally looked up. Marcy nodded. "You seriously don't recognize him?" Amanda laughed, short, disbelieving. "Sure, that's what he wants you to think." "No," Marcy said, lowering her voice. "That's what he is. I saw his name on the manifest when he boarded. Mr. Denzel Washington." Amanda rolled her eyes. "Probably just someone with the same name. Trust me, real celebrities don't act like that." Marcy opened her mouth to reply, but Amanda had already turned away. She didn't want to hear it. Because if it was Denzel Washington, then the tone, the necklace, the calm, it all meant something very different. And Amanda wasn't ready to admit she'd been wrong. She clutched the service tray a little tighter as she passed 2A, ignoring the way the other passengers looked at her now. Not with admiration, not with warmth, but with quiet, growing judgment. Amanda didn't know it yet, but the thing she thought made him small, that quiet, grounded presence, was the very thing that made him great. And the more she refused to see it, the more the truth would rise. Because real power doesn't shout. Sometimes, it just waits. Later in the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed for rest, a gentle hush fell over first class. Passengers settled in with blankets and earbuds, the sky outside melting into a sea of stars. Denzel remained upright, his book resting on his lap. He wasn't reading anymore. His fingers absently toyed with the necklace around his neck, rubbing the worn cross between his thumb and forefinger. The woman in the navy pantsuit across the aisle, who had noticed the earlier tension, leaned slightly toward him. "Forgive me," she said softly, "but your necklace, it looks meaningful." Denzel looked over, his expression softening. "It is," he said. She waited, sensing a story lived in the quiet behind his words. "It was my father's," he continued, his voice low and even. "He was a pastor, didn't have much, but he had faith that could move mountains." The woman nodded, saying nothing. "He gave it to me before I ever set foot on a movie set," Denzel said, smiling faintly. "Told me no matter where I go, who I become, remember who I am. Remember why I started." He looked down at the necklace again. "So I wear it, not for style, not to be seen, but because it grounds me." From behind the galley curtain, Amanda stood frozen. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the moment had caught her mid-step. The weight of Denzel's words settled on her like a cold draft. Suddenly, the necklace didn't look cheap. It looked sacred. She remained still, her hand gripping the curtain edge, something inside her shifting, uncomfortably, unwillingly. Because for the first time, she heard not the voice of a passenger, but the voice of a man, a son, a human being. And for the first time, she wondered if she'd seen anything clearly at all. The plane hummed softly through the dark skies, but Amanda's mind? It had just been cracked wide open. She moved down the aisle with a forced precision, her jaw tight, tray clutched in one hand. The scene she'd overheard, the story of the necklace, had left her shaken, but not softened. Instead of reflecting, Amanda had doubled down. She approached seat 2A again, her voice cool as glass. "Sir," she said flatly, "I need to speak with you about an issue." Denzel looked up from his book. "Sure. Is something wrong?" Amanda's eyes flicked toward the front of the cabin. "Several passengers have expressed concerns," she said, her tone too smooth to be sincere, "that your presence has been unsettling, disruptive to the first-class atmosphere." Denzel blinked once, slowly. "Disruptive how?" Amanda hesitated for a beat, long enough to reveal the weakness in her own script. "You've been standing out," she said vaguely, "asking for special accommodations, making staff uncomfortable." Denzel's brows lifted slightly. "I asked for ginger ale, and a seat I paid for." Amanda's nostrils flared. "Well," she said sharply, "if you're going to continue being uncooperative, I may need to file a report with the captain." He didn't flinch. He just looked at her. Calm, measured. "Uncooperative?" he asked, the words low but firm, "for requesting basic courtesy?" Amanda opened her mouth, but no answer came. Just the silence of someone caught in a lie that hadn't yet been realized. Denzel looked away, back to his book. Amanda stood there for a moment longer, hoping for backup that didn't come. And this time, other passengers noticed. Because when you try to turn dignity into defiance, people eventually see the truth. The silence following Amanda's accusation didn't last long. It began with a quiet voice from across the aisle. "Excuse me," said the woman in the navy pantsuit, her voice calm but resolute. "I've been sitting here the whole time. This gentleman hasn't raised his voice once. If anything, he's shown more composure than most." Amanda froze. A man 2 rows back leaned into the aisle. His salt and pepper hair and horn-rimmed glasses gave him a scholarly air. "I'm a retired lawyer," he added, "and I've observed every interaction. There's been no disruption, unless you count yours." A ripple moved through the cabin, subtle but unmistakable. A younger woman in a university hoodie turned in her seat. "You've ignored him, skipped his row, and I heard what you said earlier," she added. "You're the one making people uncomfortable." Amanda glanced around. The hush had turned against her. Eyes that once ignored her now watched intently, questioning, judging, remembering. "I was just following protocol," she mumbled, the words brittle. "Protocol doesn't excuse disrespect," the lawyer said, folding his hands neatly in his lap. Amanda stepped back, her confidence unraveling in slow motion. Denzel hadn't moved. He hadn't needed to, because sometimes dignity doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just sits quietly until the room speaks for it. Amanda turned sharply and retreated to the galley, her face flushed, her composure cracked. And, in her absence, the cabin felt lighter, not because the tension was gone, but because the truth had finally found its voice. Inside the cockpit, the glow of instruments cast a soft blue light across the faces of the crew. Captain Howard Reynolds had been flying commercial jets for over 25 years. Calm, experienced, and old school in the best way, he believed in 2 things: safety and respect, for his passengers and his crew. But when a soft knock came at the cockpit door and the first officer leaned over with a hushed tone, he knew something unusual was unfolding. "There's some tension in first class, sir. A passenger may be getting mistreated, possibly a high-profile one." Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Mistreated?" The first officer nodded. "Crew-related. Name flagged on the manifest as Denzel Washington." The captain blinked. He set down his flight log and stood without hesitation. Within minutes, the cabin doors parted and the captain stepped into first class, his presence commanding but unassuming. He scanned the row and found him seat 2A, calm, composed, unbothered on the outside. But Captain Reynolds knew the difference between peace and restraint. He approached with purpose. "Mr. Washington," he said warmly, tipping his cap. "Is everything all right, sir?" Denzel looked up, offering a polite smile. "Appreciate you checking in, Captain. I'm fine. But I'd say the energy in the cabin's been a little unbalanced." The words were carefully chosen, but they landed with weight. Captain Reynolds turned slightly, his gaze shifting to the nearby passengers. Their faces said it all: support, concern, confirmation. The captain nodded once, then turned toward the galley where Amanda stood frozen, halfway out of view. "Amanda," he said, his tone steady but direct. "A moment." She stepped forward slowly, her jaw tightening. "Yes, Captain?" "Let's talk," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone said enough. Because on this flight, turbulence wasn't in the sky. It was in the choices made on the ground, and the captain was ready to set things straight. Amanda followed Captain Reynolds into the galley, her heels clicking louder than usual on the narrow aisle floor. Her mind raced, trying to shape excuses before the conversation even began. But when the captain turned to her, arms crossed, jaw tight, there was no room left for spin. "Do you know who you've been speaking to?" he asked, his voice still low but edged in disappointment. I heard someone say the name, but I didn't," she began, already on the defensive. "That is Denzel Washington," the captain said, cutting her off with quiet finality. "One of the most respected men in this country, and you treated him like he was trespassing." Amanda's face lost all color. The name now struck like a lightning bolt, not just because of the fame, but because of what it meant, that everything she had assumed, everything she had said, had been aimed at someone who had done nothing but carry himself with grace. "I thought," she faltered, "I just didn't recognize him." "That's the problem," Captain Reynolds said, his gaze never wavering. "You didn't see him. And what's worse, you didn't try." Amanda's hands trembled slightly at her sides. The weight of her behavior pressed down hard now. Each moment she had dismissed, each judgment she had whispered, now playing back in her head with sharp, painful clarity. The captain sighed and softened only slightly. "For the rest of the flight, I'm having Marcy take over first class. You'll assist in the back." Amanda nodded slowly, the gravity of his words sinking in. This wasn't just a reassignment, it was a statement. As she stepped out of the galley and watched Marcy head toward 2A with fresh towels and a respectful smile, Amanda's stomach twisted, not because she'd been caught, but because, for the first time, she understood what it felt like to be small and what it meant to truly see someone after it's too late. The rest of the cabin didn't look her way, not in pity, not in outrage, just in quiet, watchful understanding, because respect doesn't come from recognition, it comes from the way you treat people when you think no one's watching. The cabin had settled. The lights dimmed again. The hush returned. Amanda now stood at the far end of the galley, her uniform still crisp, but her posture heavier, like something inside her had shifted. Marcy had taken over first-class service, moving with quiet warmth and ease. Denzel sat peacefully in seat 2A, his book closed now, resting in his lap. He gazed out the window, watching stars blink across the endless dark. Amanda hesitated before stepping forward. "Mr. Washington," she said softly. He turned, not coldly, not with anger, just present. She lowered her voice. "Do you mind if I speak with you for a moment?" He nodded once. "Of course." She knelt slightly beside the seat, keeping her voice low so no one else could hear. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray the weight of her regret. "I made a lot of assumptions. I was rude, dismissive, and none of it had anything to do with you." Denzel studied her quietly, not judging, listening. Amanda continued, "I didn't recognize you, but that shouldn't have mattered." He gave a small, quiet nod. "That's the thing," he said, voice smooth and steady. "It's not about who I am." Amanda's eyes lifted to meet his. "It's about how we treat people we don't recognize." She swallowed hard, the truth of it sinking deep. "You didn't know me," he said, "and yet I knew exactly who you were showing me you were." His voice wasn't angry. It was a mirror reflecting what needed to be seen. And Amanda, in that moment, saw it all. Amanda bowed her head. The mask had fully dropped now. No pretense, no deflection, just a person humbled by truth. "I'm truly sorry," she said. "You showed patience I didn't deserve. I don't have an excuse, but I promise you, I won't forget this." Denzel nodded slowly, the lines on his face softening. "I believe you," he said. She exhaled, grateful, but still aware of the gap she had to bridge. Denzel leaned forward just slightly, his voice now just between the two of them. "Character," he said, "is how you treat the quiet ones, not just the stars." Amanda blinked, her breath catching. That line, it struck not like a reprimand, but like scripture, etched into her, impossible to ignore. "Thank you," she whispered. Denzel offered a small smile, then returned to his seat, folding his hands and looking once again out the window. No victory speech, no gloating, just dignity. The kind that doesn't raise its voice, but raises others. Amanda walked back to the galley changed, not by punishment, but by grace. As the wheels touched down, the cabin came to life with the usual rustle of seat belts and overhead bins. But something about this descent felt different. Passengers moved slower, more thoughtful. Some glanced at seat 2A with quiet admiration. A few offered gentle nods of acknowledgement, not for fame, but for how Denzel had carried himself through the storm. The woman in the navy pantsuit leaned in one last time as she passed. "You handled yourself with class, Mr. Washington," she said. He smiled warmly. "Thank you, ma'am." Amanda remained behind, standing near the rear galley as passengers filed out. She watched Denzel rise, gather his bag, and exit the cabin with calm ease. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. Because his impact didn't ride on applause, it lived in the silence he left behind. And for Amanda, that silence rang louder than anything. She stared out the small galley window as the airport lights blurred by. She didn't just feel regret, she felt a beginning. By midweek, quiet waves from the flight had begun to reach the airline's upper decks. A passenger's email, a crew report, a captain's note, written in strong yet careful language. An internal memo was issued to all staff. Subject: passenger relations and respectful conduct. Attached: mandatory refresher training in inclusivity, perception, and implicit bias. It wasn't sensational. No headlines, no PR spin, just accountability, finally catching up. And Amanda? She didn't wait to be assigned. She signed up voluntarily. The next month, she stood in front of a room of new flight attendants, her hands folded, her voice steady, no longer defensive, just honest. "I learned the hard way," she told them. "It's easy to serve the people you expect to impress. The real test is how you treat the ones who don't ask for anything." She shared the story, without naming names, about a necklace, a misunderstanding, and the kind of man who corrected a wrong not with fury, but with grace. And slowly, Amanda became someone different, not perfect, but aware. Because sometimes change doesn't come through force. Sometimes it starts with a cross around someone's neck and the courage to listen to what it represents. Months later, in a sunlit studio just off Wilshire Boulevard, Denzel Washington sat across from a young journalist during a quiet moment between projects. The conversation had covered the usual: his latest film, his thoughts on legacy, his love for theater. But as the camera kept rolling and the host shuffled through notes, one final question surfaced. "There was a story," the journalist said carefully, "about a flight earlier this year. Something about an incident in first class. Do you remember that?" Denzel's eyes twinkled, but his posture stayed relaxed. He reached up almost instinctively and touched the familiar cross resting against his chest, still on its leather cord, still faded, still his. He chuckled softly. "That necklace has been through storms bigger than one flight," he said. The host smiled, sensing the story ran deeper than the words let on. Denzel continued, "You know, people always think the spotlight teaches you the most, but I've found it's the quiet moments, The small things, the way someone looks at you when they don't think you're anybody. That's when the real lessons show up. He paused, eyes softening. I didn't say much on that flight. Didn't need to. Life has a way of revealing folks, especially when they think no one's paying attention. The journalist leaned forward slightly. And the necklace? Denzel looked down at it for a beat, running his fingers along the curve of the cross. My father gave it to me a long time ago, told me to carry it not like jewelry, but like memory, like meaning. And every time I think about hiding who I am just to make someone else comfortable, he smiled. I remember who I come from. He sat back, nodding once. It stayed with me that day, just like it always has. The interview wrapped shortly after, the cameras cut, and Denzel stood, offering his signature handshake and quiet gratitude. But long after he left the room, that final quote echoed through the edit bays and the internet alike. That necklace has been through storms bigger than one flight. And just like that, the story rose again, not about confrontation or fame, but about faith, grace, and how the smallest symbol can carry the weight of generations. Because the necklace remained. And so did the lesson. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.